Okay, thank you everyone for joining. I'm Jen Meduco. I'm with the American Cancer Society. And thank you so much for giving us your evening to talk about this really important topic. So this is session 2 for the Train to Trainer series in partnership with the California Hawaii NAACP. We are on the heels of Colorectal Cancer Awareness Month, and as we jump into National Minority Cancer Awareness Month, we really thought that this was the perfect topic for us to touch on, especially because cancer, and specifically colorectal cancer, is a disease that disproportionately affects the Black community more than any other communities. So we are really excited to partner on this very important discussion topic. And we hope that today you leave motivated to be able to spread the word, to get screened and find ways that you yourself can get involved. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the moderator for tonight's discussion, Cedric Spencer with the NAACP. So 1 second.
All right, thank you, Jen. Before we get started, we will do a poll and it should pop up on everyone's screen.
So yeah, we just want to know, what is everyone's connection to today's topic? I'll just give it another second. And yeah, so, okay. Seems like people want to know more, people want to get involved, so that's really great. I'm going to give it another second and then we'll end the poll. Okay. So seems like people really are really interested about today's topic. So it's clear that this is really something that we should be discussing. So back to you, Cedric.
Sounds good. All right, can we go to the next slide?
Yes.
All right. Okay, so basically we have an agenda that's laid out today, and we have a special guest with us. But before, let's talk about someone who we know who's had colorectal cancer and who have passed. There's a name that many of us know, Chadwick Boseman. He was his name resonates with us because he was the leading actor in the Black Panther, and we all know that he passed a little too soon. Many of us have had similar quiet battles with colorectal cancer. We hope today's discussion will provide or raise some awareness and provide some important talking points for when we all go out and engage with the community. Leading today's discussion is Dr. Zuri Morel. He is a leading colorectal surgeon here in Los Angeles. He has over 40 publications, including scientific book articles and book chapters. Dr. Morel specializes in colon cancer, rectal cancer, hemorrhoids, Crohn's disease, colitis, IBD treatment, and colonoscopies. He is also he's also a scientist and developed a product called anal rejuvenation. He is a Morehouse man. He's also a graduate of UCLA Medical School. He's done some work or doing some studies at University of Irvine, and also has done some studies and some experience at Cedars-Sinai Hospital. With that, I just want to now pass it over to Dr. Morel. We hope this is an interactive conversation, so you can either ask a question if you feel the need, or if you don't want to ask a question directly, feel free to put it in the chat. But nonetheless, we want this conversation to be interactive for everyone. With that being said, Dr. Morel, the floor is yours. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. I want to thank the ACS for having me, and I want to thank everyone who's on the Zoom. I wish I could see everybody. I usually start these talks off by I want you guys to unmute yourself, and I want to tell you something. People always say, especially when I'm talking about cancer, I'm really fired up. I'm really excited to spread this news about colorectal cancer. Now, if I tell you that there's a cancer where there'll be about 150,000 people diagnosed with this every year, and about 50,000 people who die, okay? Colorectal cancer is the #3 cancer in men, #3 cancer in women. But when you put both of these groups together, it's the second leading cause of cancer death in America. Okay, so what if I tell you though, it is almost completely preventable? Does that make sense? How can I have something that is the second most common cause of cancer-related death, yet I'm telling you through what we do to our bodies, what we put in our bodies, and screening and procedures should not really be a major problem in this country. There are countries where this is not a major problem. And I'm talking about colorectal cancer. And so I want everybody to unmute themselves, and I want you to say the words colon, rectum, now the hardest one, anus. Say, I will not die from fear.
I will not die from fear.
Will not die from embarrassment.
I will not die from embarrassment.
All right. So the reason you can mute yourself, the reason I say this is that these are some of the reasons why people and us are dying from this disease, but we're going to show you how we can modify our own behavior, that we have the power, like internally for us and then our community, to actually change the plight of this disease, especially with African Americans. So next slide. So I always like to start by saying, what is cancer, number one, okay? So cancer in and of itself is when cells lose the ability to stop growing. And so I have a patient, she is 42 years old now. And if you guys have ever seen these shirts that say like F asterisk, K cancer, it's just stupid. She created these shirts, she created this whole company because cancer cells are stupid. Cancer cells basically lose the ability to stop growing. So the reason my fingers are this long and not this long, the reason I'm 6'2" and not 8 feet tall is that our cells know when to stop growing. Well, cancer cells lose the ability to stop growing. And cancer cells just grow and grow. They actually grow and invade normal tissue. They actually outgrow the blood supply of the cells themselves. That's why a lot of times people have bleeding. And they actually take all the nutrients from the body because they grow so fast, and your whole body basically shuts down because all the energy, all the nutrients the cancer cells are using to grow. Now, colorectal cancer is just cancer that starts in the actual colon. Now, on another level, it's important to know, what is the function of the colon? So when I ask people, they're always like, to make food. That's not the function of the colon. So really briefly, when you eat, you put food in your mouth, you masticate it, you chew it up. It goes down our esophagus. It goes to our stomach. Now, as most of us know, our stomach has acid. That actually grinds up the food. That breaks up the food. The food then just goes to the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. Those three organs are what makes up the small intestine. 99% of absorption of our nutrients comes from the small intestine. Then everything goes into God's organ, the colon. Okay, so the colon itself, once you have that there, it's the waste and it's liquid. The colon's job is actually to reabsorb water. Okay, so all the time when we tell you to eat a lot of fiber, drink a lot of water, part of that reason is that the colon itself reabsorbs water for the body, but you still need to have water in the colon, and you need to have fiber, and fiber helps to hold water in the colon so that waste can be eliminated. Okay, the colon then sends the hardened stool, the hardened byproducts, which is stool, to the rectum until a socially appropriate time for you to let it go. Okay, and the anus is also very important because the anus is the actual smartest part of the body. When people always say, "Why'd you go into colorectal surgery?" I say, because I'm the smartest guy in my med school class. They say, "What does that have to do with it?" I said, "Well, the anus is the smartest organ." They say, "What do you mean?" I say, there's not another place in your body that can differentiate between a liquid, a solid, and a gas. You know when you have to pass gas when it's working right. You know when you have a little, soft diarrhea, and you know when you have to actually have a bowel movement. So it's a smart organ, and that's what the anus is for. Next slide. And so when you think about the signs and symptoms of colorectal cancer, this is why screening is so important, and this is why we're here today, is that the symptoms, especially early on, are very nondescript. So change in bowel habits is a big one. And people always say, well, what does that mean? Well, if you go like clockwork every single day, same time every day, and all of a sudden you start going every 4 days, and you notice that the stool is harder, for instance. And, this is getting worse and worse. You try over the counter, laxatives, you try different things, you increase your fiber, you do all those things. And after a month, if you notice that this is getting worse or this is a change, that is a change in bowel habit. If you usually have soft stool and you're usually, or you usually have soft stool, or you go even every 3 days, let's say, and that's always been you, and all of a sudden you're having diarrhea all the time, and this lasts for a month or so, then you worry about that, and that's what a change of bowel habits are. You have to really be in tune with yourself because this is probably 9 times out of 10, or maybe 8 times out of 10, this is just something that your body goes through from time to time. But you can't assume that. If it lasts longer than a month, you should be calling your doctor about these things, okay? Something like that happens often, rectal bleeding. People ask me about that all the time. Now, the most common cause of rectal bleeding that is painless is hemorrhoids. But you have this bleeding issue. You make sure, you see if you're straining or not. You see if the blood's dripping in the toilet. If that lasts a week, you maybe go get some of the over-the-counter remedies. And if that's still not working, you only accept some of these changes at maximum for a month before you talk to a specialist. But this also means looking at when you wipe, you got to look at things of that nature, okay? Now, when you get to cramping, abdominal pain, that is often when there is a larger cancer than there has to be, okay? And so the reason screening is important is that by the time you have a lot of abdominal pain from a cancer, it's not too late, but it is probably a more advanced cancer. And so the whole point of all of these screenings, well, one screening is to prevent and to find cancer, which is the colonoscopy. And some of these stool tests are great because they help find cancer and find cancer early. And so that's why all of these, paying attention to your body, number one, is the most common way you can either prevent it, and we'll talk about how you prevent it with nutrients and diet, but also how you can, if you have any of these changes and you're in tune with that, then you can find a problem early before it becomes a major problem, a major disease. Next slide. And so, the thing that's really interesting is that the exact cause of colorectal cancer isn't known. Only about 5 to 8% is actually genetic, okay? And so most of the time we think it's from the fact that it's related to changes in our genetic makeup. Like my grandmother and then my mother used to always say, if it's important, God gave you 2. And so most of the time we have these 2 genes. You think about it this way, okay? So let's say that your parents have a predisposition for colorectal cancer. So one of your genes already is affected. But then there's things that you can do. You put, we eat a lot of red meat. We don't eat enough fiber. We are obese. That can also affect this other gene. You need at least one of these genes need to be normal in order for you to live this healthy life. And so even if you have a predisposition, most of the time you can actually help to curb the inevitability that you may feel this disease can bring by what you can put in your body and other things we'll talk about. So there's always risk factors you can change and risk factors you can't. So, you can't change your race, okay? So African Americans, and we'll talk about why, but has a higher rate of colorectal cancer than every group except for Native Americans, okay? And you can't change your age. So most colorectal cancer happens to people over the age of 50, but let me tell you, there's been a 12-fold increase in millennials and people under the age of 50 getting colorectal cancer. And one of the biggest reasons for that is if you look down, number 3, obesity. You guys, obesity is probably the biggest epidemic in this country. Obesity is relates to over 60% of cancers that you can get is obesity contributes to this, okay? The reason that we think so many young people are getting cancers now is that, did you know like 2 out of 3 kids, children are obese, are overweight, obese. By the age of 40, 75% of millennials will be obese. This is an epidemic. And the reason obesity in and of itself can cause all of these cancers or can be associated with all these cancers is that being obese and having excess fat is a pro-inflammatory condition. That means, and the way I like to break it down for people who aren't in the medical field is that if this is a pro-inflammatory condition and your body is fighting itself and the fat causes these cells that help fight cancer not to work as well, okay, then when you do have changes that come up, because we always have precancerous changes that if they multiplied, you get an actual cancer. Then your body can't fight that because it's fighting itself. Obesity is a huge predictor and of outcome and whether or not you're going to get cancer. So that's number one. Diet. So we can really do something with our diet. Now, it's harder because I remember when I was a kid, it was cheaper for my mom to go home and cook a nice healthy meal than it was for us to go to certain fast food restaurants, okay? Now, it's actually cheaper to go to a fast food restaurant. And it's hard because you pick your kids up, you've been working all day. The kids pass by, I won't name any restaurants because I don't want to, in case they're sponsoring the ACS, but you know what I mean. You go by these fast food restaurants and you smell this food that smells good. I mean, it smells great. And your kids say, I want this, I want that. And actually you can get it for like $4. Your kids are full, they seem happy, but you don't have to cook. And so that's really hard because that food is one of the biggest reasons also for cancer. Now, it's really interesting because African Americans have one of the highest rates in the world, okay, of colorectal cancer. But did you know 2 of the countries with the lowest rate in the world are Nigeria and Uganda? Now, there's barely anything that's different from an African American's genetic makeup and a Caucasian. And there's nothing different about an African American versus a Ugandan or Nigerian. Okay, I go to medical missions in Uganda all the time, and I never have operated on colon cancer. Never. Okay. Part of the reason that we think that Ugandans and Nigerians, for instance, have the lowest rates of colorectal cancer is number one, there's hardly any obesity. A lot of the work that's done is actually physical work. Okay, so people are great shape. One of the other biggest things are they have low red meat consumption. Okay, red meat consumption in and of itself, and I hate to tell everybody, but pork is a red meat. Okay, it's not a white meat, but beef, lamb, pork, the way we digest that. So when you eat it, no matter, I don't care if it's free range, I don't care if it's in a cage, I don't care if it's organic. Okay, everybody, all of the way that we digest meat is actually into something called a nitrosamine. Now, a nitrosamine is basically a procarcinogen. What does that mean? If you take enough of it and you lay it on your cells and you leave it there long enough, you can have a cancer growth. Okay, so I tell people all the time, look, I eat red meat maybe once every couple months, but if you eat it every single day, try to just drop that down to 3 days. Try to drop it down to 2 days a week, but every little bit helps. But it won't help you as much as it will help your children. I can do this because just for some reason, I'm 47 years old, but my parents just never had a lot of red meat, and so I grew up not eating a lot of red meat. And, so that actually helped me. So you may not necessarily help yourselves, but your kids, it doesn't matter what we tell them. I have 2 beautiful daughters, and until I started practicing what I preach, I could tell them to do all the healthy things, but they're like, Daddy, you don't do it. And so these are some of the things, the changes that we can make. Another issue that in Africa I note is that one of the biggest causes of colorectal cancer and a lot of other cancers, it contributes to it, is vitamin D deficiency. So African Americans have a higher rate of vitamin D deficiency than other groups. Now, vitamin D is actually is made in our skin. So you actually have to be in the sun, and African Americans, we have to be in the sun a little longer than Caucasians because we have this beautiful thing called melanin, which protects us, but also it takes longer for the sun to penetrate, and that's where vitamin D is created. Now, vitamin D, we always think of milk, but there's a lot of other ways to get it. Okay, now it's so easy. I eat gummy vitamin D. Why is vitamin D important? Well, vitamin D helps to stop excess cell proliferation. It helps to cause cells to remember that they're supposed to stop growing. Okay, so this is huge. And this is something that in this country, especially us, we have lower rates of it now. It's interesting because with COVID, we think that this has probably gotten exponentially worse, especially for kids, because we were always in the house, okay? And so this is something that you can do and you can take, and there's delicious varieties of vitamin D, and this could definitely help you, all right? And so that in Africa, once again, not a lot of obesity, not a lot of red meat consumption. What's really interesting about red meat there is that it's so, when I was in Uganda, we went to before we went to the mission, went to one of these nice restaurants, and I had never had actually fresh meat. It's not that good. I'll be honest with you. Fresh meat, the reason we like meat in this country so much is because of all the byproducts, all of the additives that are put in it. I mean, fresh meat, I was good actually. So the whole time there, I was eating the poja, which is a lot of beans and a lot of these fibers, and it's really amazing. Now, one of the things I do like to share is I love science. However, there's a scientist, his name was Paul Berkeley, and this man was more committed to science than any scientist I've ever read about. So he was a Irish sailor that was on an English ship when England had colonized Uganda. And he, for some reason, was interested. He's the first one that put together diet and physiology. So he had the Ugandans measure their stool. He would collect Ugandan stool and he would measure it. And then he measured the stool of the sailors in the ship. It was totally different diets. He found that Ugandans made 450 grams of a soft stool every 3 days. The sailors on the British ship made 100 grams of a hard stool every 7 days. So he's the first person to put together, like, why do Ugandans have so much food and we don't? Well, the thought is, well, it's not even the thought, is that the fiber consumption is high. Once again, I was telling you that fiber, we need 20 to 25 grams of fiber a day. Okay, now they're about to raise it to 30. Fiber helps to hold water in the colon so that you can do something called decreasing your colonic transit time. The reason I'm spending so much time on this slide is this is the reason I'm happy to be a colorectal surgeon, because my goal is, there's a lot of other surgeries I do, but I never want to do a colon cancer surgery again. That's my goal, okay? And these are the things you can do to change that. So fiber decreases your colonic transit time. So from the time the waste gets to your colon to the time you expel it, that's the colonic transit time. Now, something you can do without getting an expensive test at a doctor's office, and I see one of my counterparts, Dr. Goffney, on here, who's amazing. We talk about this all the time. He's also an ACS speaker. One of the things that we can do, and I like to say a quick and dirty way, you can kind of see what your overall transit time of waste is, or food that you put in your body, and then the waste is excreted. And I do mean that pun literally, quick and dirty, is that if you all eat a plate of red beets, okay, you eat a plate of them, right? And you look at the time from the time you eat those beets to the time you look in the toilet and you think you need to call somebody like me because you swear you're bleeding, okay? So that's basically from the time that the beets and the dye from the beets are going to stain your stool red. That is kind of a proxy. That tells you your overall digestion, okay? It's not an exact proxy for the colon time, but if this time is between 24 to about 33 hours, your body is working, okay? That's clockwork. That's what you want, okay? If it's longer than that, you definitely need to increase your fiber. You definitely need to make some of these changes, okay? So this is very important. And so that's one of the other reasons that we think that in Africa, certain African countries, there's not a lot of colon cancer. Now, two other things real quick is that there's a lot of consumption of curcumin, okay? Curcumin and turmeric are amazing. Nigeria has like a lot of the food is made with curcumin. You can actually get these now over the counter, but curcumin, turmeric, these help fight cancer. Okay, it's hard because there's scientific studies now that we're starting to look at this. So I should say that it is a lot of thought that this is why a lot of these places are low in colon cancer, just like India. Now, here's what's interesting. They're starting to see a rise in these countries now too, because one thing that we export as Americans is garbage. Okay, so now what's interesting is that in these countries, the rich people in Uganda, the rich people in Nigeria, and the rich people in India are starting to have obesity problems. They're starting to have obesity problems, and they're having more cancer now. Why is that? Well, only rich people can afford to eat at the M or at the KFC or at the Taco Bell. Okay, it's these are popping up, and you're starting to see a change in their diet. So when you look at obesity rates, in Mexico, Guatemala, the obesity rate is actually a lot lower than when people cross and you come to this country, because in this country, even if you try to eat the same foods, a lot of it has more fat. They have more, different processes. And so we can see obesity increase when people move to this country. And so those are things kind of what we talked about that we can do to kind of decrease our risk. And then lastly, processed foods, you guys. Processed foods, and I hate to say it because one of my, it just smells so good, bacon. Okay, everybody loves bacon. I got kosher Jewish friends that have slipped up and eat a little bacon. I got Muslim friends that eat a little bacon. Everybody, I'm not going to lie and say I don't eat bacon every once in a while. Okay, it's hard because it is delicious. However, you cannot eat that all the time. That is one of the highest processed food groups. Same with cold cuts. Cold cuts are all processed. And on another note, I give talks to kids. There is something that one of the biggest things with obesity, I always say, is those fire hot Cheetos. You ever see kids just licking that little red dust off their fingers? What is a Cheeto? Have you guys ever thought what a Cheeto is? Is it a potato or is it a corn? So Cheetos are actually all processed. It's a little bit of corn, a little bit of this, but then if you read what's in a Cheeto, it is like a lab experience, okay? And what I'm saying is that it's once in a while it's fine, but kids are living on this. You know, kids are literally living on this and sodas and all these. So I say all of this because most of us know about smoking. Okay, you know, smoking is not good for anything. Okay, it's actually horrible for everything. Most of us know that alcohol use. So colorectal cancer, heavy alcohol use is not good for anything. Okay, people always say, "What about a little glass of wine?" Because there's some thought that that can decrease, colon cancer. I don't know anybody who takes wine like it's medicine. Okay, wine is, that could be an excuse, and wine's fine, but don't use it as an excuse to drink a bottle a day. Okay, so that's really the biggest thing. So the reason that this is so important is there's things you can't change, right? You can't change your race, you can't change your age, you can't change your medical history. Okay, but what you could do from this slide is that you can know your medical history. So a quick aside is that I always tell people the best time to talk about colorectal cancer, and the reason I actually make you say these words is at the dinner table. Because at the dinner table is when you actually are putting the things in your mouth that can lead to this. Okay. So my dad, who is a highly educated man, okay, I love him to death. He hates it when I tell this story, but I tell it all the time. When I talk about what I do, I would say, well, Dad, colorectal. He's like, rectal. It's the word rectal. That's what gets people. It's like, I'm trying to eat. I'm trying to eat. I'm like, Dad, this is very important. You got to make sure you get your colonoscopy. This was years ago. So my dad's like, okay, he turned 50 because at the time the recommendation was 50, and thank God that the ACS has worked so hard to change that. So it's 45 now. But he finally goes to get his colonoscopy. Okay, he gets his colonoscopy. They find that he has 3 polyps. Okay, subsequent colonoscopies they always find polyps in him, and we'll talk about what a polyp is. Polyps are basically, if you leave them in there, they become cancer. We'll get into that. So because I knew his history, okay, I'm 47 now, but because he had over 12 polyps and I knew this, I got my colonoscopy at age 42. Now I was in decent shape. I was still about 20 pounds overweight. I wasn't necessarily practicing everything I'm preaching. Okay, I wasn't getting enough fiber. I had a 2-centimeter high grade precancerous polyp in my right colon. You could not have found it with a sigmoidoscopy. You only could have found it with a colonoscopy. If I did not know my dad's history, I would have had cancer. I would be talking as a cancer survivor. Okay, that's how powerful that is. Is that once they found his polyps, I'm like, Dad, I saved your life. And now after I had my colonoscopy, he's like, I saved your life. And I said, that's true. And that's really how the power of this disease the power that we have in terms of changing this disease. Not only what we put in our bodies, but talking about our history, knowing our history. That is our potential family history. This is very important. A lot of patients I have come in and say, oh, my grandmother died from stomach cancer, which doesn't mean anything because we don't know where it is. So it's important to try to get the facts because that will affect you. But more important, that affects your generation, your bloodline, your family, affects all of us. Okay. So those are things that are really important. Next slide. So once again, we talked about this, 150,000 cases will be diagnosed, new cases, 52,000 people are expected to die. And we want this to go down, down, down. Colorectal cancer is the second leading cause of cancer-related death in the United States for men and women. Men will tell me, I thought this was only a disease for women. Women will tell me, I thought this was only a disease for men. It's both, okay? Number 1 cancer in America are lung cancer. Number 2 cancer, breast cancer, cause of death is breast cancer in women. Prostate in men. Number 3 is colon. But when you add the men and women who have colon cancer and die from it, it's the second leading cause of cancer-related death. Next slide. And so when you look at incidence and death rates, so the bottom line with this slide is that African Americans have the highest incidence rates, okay? And this is after you take the Native American population out. So we have the second highest incidence rates and the second highest and the highest actually death rates of any group in any ethnicity here, okay? Now, this is important for many reasons, and we'll talk about why this happens. However, what I really want you to get from this is that the incidence of this is 20% higher in Blacks than it is whites, and Blacks are 40% more likely to die from this disease when diagnosed. Now, the one good news is, for years, all of this colorectal cancer had been on the downslope for every race except for African Americans. Okay, and that actually has changed. Finally, we're seeing a decrease in our population. Now, one of the biggest reasons for this, and listen, I'm a I work and I love the hospital I work with, Cedars-Sinai, but I work with them. I'm a private practice surgeon. And so a lot of private practice surgeons weren't happy by Obamacare. I was. This is one of the first times that you've been able to see a policy that was enacted with Obamacare opening up so much healthcare to people who otherwise couldn't afford it, that we've actually seen an increase in screening and actually rates for different underrepresented minorities decrease. And so this is a big reason why, because of the screening, that even though this disparity has been horrible for us, we're actually hopefully turning the tide, but we still have a long way to go. Okay, so it's not all doom and gloom, and hopefully the ACS is hoping that everybody on this will learn, and then will help to bring these numbers down even further. So I'm so happy for everybody being on this call. Next slide. All righty, so what are some of the factors you think contribute to Black individuals having a higher risk of getting and dying from colorectal cancer than white individuals? I just need somebody to shout out. I need about three factors that you think might contribute. And this
Obesity.
will help facilitate it.
Not getting your checkup.
Okay.
Obesity.
Yes. All right.
Diet.
Yeah. Okay.
Providers not talking to their patients about it.
Thank you. Yes. Okay, great. So let's go to the next slide. Those are all part of it. You guys are great. That's all part of it. So there's factors of place and factors of space. So we talked about the lifestyle factors, okay? Socioeconomic status also, because even though that there's multiple avenues now for healthcare, it's still not everybody has that. And more importantly, not everybody has access. So even if you have certain insurance, even if you have Medi-Cal, for instance, it's still hard for you to find a doctor, okay? But a lot of it is not only, you know, when I give these talks, sometimes people say, well, it's all on us, right? They always like, well, if you didn't eat this, you didn't eat that, you people this, you people that. It's not all us, okay? It's also some of the structural racism, but even more with physicians, it's unconscious bias. So I'm extremely happy because at Cedars, I'm the head of the Physicians Task Force for Unconscious Bias, and we're very excited because we're going to be doing unconscious bias training and testing for doctors, okay? Now, what's so important about that is that I always I walk a tightrope a little bit because I don't want to be misconstrued as saying that if you're Black, you have to have a Black doctor, okay? A lot of times what happens is that you still need a doctor, I don't care what race they are versus what you are, who understands you, who you can work with, who a lot of times with doctors, when there's unconscious bias, you think when somebody has a certain body language, when somebody is saying something a certain way, you take it differently than what they mean, okay? One of the biggest misconceptions about us, about African Americans, is that we're so aggressive, okay? Let me tell you, that is one of the biggest or false stereotypes I think, period, okay? When I had my patients, when I started working in Cedars-Sinai is a Jewish hospital, okay? Most of my patients initially, I have mostly Jewish patients and mostly Black patients when I started. My Black patients would come in and I would, you know, tell them what I think, tell them what I want to do. And most of them, 95% would sit there quietly and say, okay, doc. So my young Caucasian and Jewish patients would come in with like articles and questions and ask me all these questions. And I wasn't even raised like that, right? I was raised where you just listen to the doctor and go whatever, but they weren't, at first I was like, are they doing this because I'm Black? Or I was really young at the time, not as much anymore, or because I'm young. And no, culturally, they were taught, and maybe some people on this call were to interact with doctors, not just take it as gospel. So they were always ready for their appointments. And I kind of took that at first, I was so new to me that I thought it was like disrespectful, but it's not. This is something that I tell us all the time is that, you know, like mom always says, right? If nobody toots you, you don't toot your own horn, right? If nobody toots you, toot your own horn. So you have to be prepared for your doctor's appointments. You have to understand, and you have to choose a doctor that works with you. It really doesn't matter if your surgeon's a jerk. I mean, as long as you're a good surgeon, I think there's no excuse for that, but your primary care doctor should be a teammate. You should not be getting talked down to, you should be working with. But part of that working with is being prepared. Like I know as a physician, and I assume there's other than Dr. Goffney, there's other you know, doctors on this line. I'm blessed because the reason I do private practice is I don't have a large number of patients, because if you hear me already, I love to talk, okay? So I love to talk to my patients. I love to find out details about their life, okay, and everything. But we don't have, a lot of doctors don't have time to do that. If you were working in HMO, if you work in other aspects of it, and we have to deal with insurance companies, we have to deal with health systems, to the point where most of even my job is not dealing with patients. I probably only 35% of the time deal with patients, but that's the only reason I went into this, was to deal with patients. So even I have paperwork and all these things. So that is a us problem. That should not be a you problem, okay? So you should come in, every time you have a doctor's appointment, you should think before, what do I want to get out of this appointment? And I'll be honest with you, say you're not really sure, if you walk into a doctor's office and you unfold a piece of paper and you sit down, there's a higher chance that doc will actually sit down and talk to you. And guess what? As a physician, if we're still getting, hey, I have to go see this patient now, it's still like, let's have another appointment. Let's make it an X amount of time and we'll talk about this. I always tell patients that, let's say you come in for high blood pressure and the doctor, and you're already on a medicine, and you go there and your blood pressure is still high, so the doctor puts you on another medicine. What I would also recommend is just saying, hey, doc, before I leave, if this doesn't work, how will we know it's going to work? How long should we try this before we move to something else? So this is called being your own healthcare advocate. And more important than anything I talk about today in cancer or anything, it's literally being your healthcare advocate. Now, that doesn't mean coming in and saying, no, doc, you this or that or the other, which nobody would ever do. It's literally about being prepared for your appointments and discussing it and finding a doctor who's willing to do that for you, right? And if that doctor is too busy and they don't, most doctors will make more time, but if they can't, then, you need to find somebody else for primary care. This is the person that is your lifeline, okay, in more ways than one. And if they don't understand you, not necessarily because of race, because of where they grew up, because of biases, then it's up to you to find somebody else. And don't just take that, okay? Because that will save your life or kill you. And that's the most important thing, all right? In addition, as COVID taught us, there's so many medical comorbidities that we have, but it's because of these other issues, okay? It's not, I harp on this because people will always want to blame the victim a lot, right? Is that you people this, you people that. And it's not all of our fault that we have some of these issues. And if you look back far enough, it's mostly not our fault, but you can't deal with that now. We have to just take it as it is and fix it. And so these are tools that I think will help you fix it. I mean, there's things that you can do, once again, fiber, water, vitamin D, exercise, no smoking, things of that nature, and also finding a doctor that understands you. Next slide. And so in terms of the incidence rates, and you can look at this, so this is by sex. And so we see that it's basically almost equal in terms of men and women getting colorectal cancer. But when you look at the incidence, it's been declining since 1980s, and it's still declining. However, for African Americans, it's been declining a lot lower. Next slide, and we'll talk about that. That's the incidence trends, okay? Next slide. And then when you look at, once again, male, female, and these are for people less than the age of 50. Now look at this, less than the age of 50, we've seen a large increase in colorectal cancer. And so which was really awesome about this is that the ACS fought hard to actually change the guidelines to age 45. Now, guidelines for African Americans have been 45 for longer than they have been for everybody else. But this once again goes to unconscious bias. They did a survey. So I think it was 4 years after they had changed the guidelines for African Americans to age 45. And once again, now it's age 45 for all Americans for screening for colorectal cancer. So once this was changed for African Americans, 4 years later, they did a survey of gastroenterologists. And only 26% of gastroenterologists knew that African Americans were supposed to have colonoscopy at age 45. Of that 26%, 78% were black gastroenterologists. And so this is something else that unconscious bias, this is educating yourself, but this is something where the medical system also plays a big role in our health. So a lot of times they weren't, offered colonoscopies or screening tests at the appropriate age. And so this is something that is very important to know. This is why it's hard. I don't tell people who aren't in the medical field to stay on top of it, but if you can, there's different things you can read. And the ACS website is really, I'm not getting paid by the ACS, by the way. ACS helped to save my sanity when I was treating my mom for cancer, for breast cancer. ACS has done so many good things. And one of the best things they do is translate all this complicated science into things that you can read. I actually have my daughters read like two of whatever cancers, and this is kind of extreme for them, but they want to, they want to be doctors. I have them actually read the website and they can understand these things. It's really, really, really important. Next slide. And so I always talk about, when I talk about Chadwick Boseman, we all know he played larger than life heroes on the screen, but it's interesting to me because in death, he's become a real hero. So after he died, this was the first time in my practice, I've been practicing since 2007. It's the first time in my practice where I had young African-American males and even Caucasian males who were young, who did not come in because their wives made them. They actually came in because they were like, wow, this brother got it. And I'm feeling these changes. I need to get straight. First time in my life, you guys, it was amazing. And so I always say that, as sad as his death was, I had the opportunity to meet him, interact with him. And, sometimes they say, and I deal with a lot of people in that industry, and sometimes they say, you shouldn't meet your heroes because they'll only disappoint. And that is true for about, 75% of them, but this brother did not. And he really was a great guy, but he's now a true hero. He's a true hero because he has saved so many lives that he is the Black Panther, and I tell people that all the time. So while his death was a tragedy, God, his death was a blessing for a lot of people. And knowing about his struggle was a blessing because he saved a lot of lives. And the reason this slide is so important is because we've seen such an increase in colorectal cancer diagnosed, a 12-fold increase in young people. And once again, you guys, obesity is one of the major causes for this. Okay, he was not obese, and I don't know what issues led to him having that, but that is something that we can really control. And that's all about, sodas. That's all about the food that we put in our bodies. Next slide. So I know that's a lot of information, and I promise I'll move through some of the other slides quicker. But to me, everything I just talked about is like, if you got nothing else, if you turned off the Zoom right now, don't do it because I don't want to disrespect Jen over here at the ACS. But if you needed to turn off your Zoom now, you've gotten the most important parts of this talk. So go ahead.
Okay, so we'll jump in real quick and we'll have a quick question. And this is a poll that we'll have, and it'll be a true or false question. And it is this: vitamin D deficiency is more common among Blacks than white people. True or false?
I think that's true. I think Dr. Morrell covered it a little bit earlier, but I guess another question that we can have with that is, was that interesting to people that are listening right now? Was that something that you were aware of, that Black people need more vitamin D? Was that new information? Any thoughts so far?
No, so it's not that we need more, but it's harder for us we have to be out in the sun longer to make it. And also, we don't know why necessarily it's lower, other than the fact that most people aren't working outside, and we have to, and it takes actually longer for us to be out in the sun in order for us to convert vitamin D. But that's the easiest thing you can fix, because literally, you guys, you can eat vitamin D like candy now. There's gummy vitamin D. Sometimes, you think they're gummy bears, so this is something that you can actually do for to help decrease your chance of colorectal cancer. Now I see something out here about, should we cut dairy out for colorectal cancer disease? Now people think of dairy as the only way to get vitamin D. So dairy is interesting because we are the only adult mammals that drink milk. Like if you look at the lions, tigers, mammals don't typically drink milk as adults. However, and also 70% of the world's population is lactose intolerant. The people who aren't are like Nordic people. Okay, so even if you don't think you're lactose intolerant, you may get a little gassy when you eat cheese. Okay, it's a difference between being intolerant and being allergic. A small amount of dairy is not bad, but even with children, we were giving them too much milk, where in some autopsy studies of children, you can see plaques and cardiovascular disease from the high rate of fat in milk. So I'm not going to tell you not to eat milk or to drop dairy, but there's other ways to get vitamin D other than drinking milk. I'm lactose intolerant, so I love almond milk. And there's like 1,000 milks now, so oat milk, right. There's different kind of milk, so you don't necessarily have to have dairy.
And what are some of the ways that you see that if we are deficient in vitamin D, that we can go? Is it vitamins or, more time in the sun? What are some of the other ways you see us increasing our vitamin D deficiency?
Yeah, so yeah, it's just more time out in the sun, but just taking it out. Like that's one thing you can take. You can get it at Costco and just taking it orally. That way you will, you'll be able to get the nutrients you need.
Gotcha. Thank you. Let's go to the next slide.
All righty, so screening. Now, this is the other way that you can actually prevent colorectal cancer, okay? So we talked about things you can do yourself. Now, these are things that you need to know about so you can work with your doctor and make sure you get the tests you need. So it's important to remember what screening is, okay? There's screening and then there's diagnostic. Screening means you have no symptoms, you have no family history of cancer, you don't have family history of a large number of polyps, you don't have a family history of inflammatory bowel disease, i.e. Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis. You're just run-of-the-mill person, you know your history, you're feeling good, you don't have any blood in the stool, no change in bowel habits, you get screened, okay? Screening starts at age 45. Now, remember I was telling you that the reason screening is so important for this disease is that depending on the way you have screening, you can actually prevent a cancer, or once again, you can find a cancer early, okay? So number one is, so go to the next slide. And so all colorectal cancer starts as these growths called polyps, okay? So colonoscopy is one of the standards, okay, in terms of preventing colorectal cancer. I always tell my patients a colonoscopy is not done to find cancer. If you find it, we fail. A colonoscopy is done to prevent cancer. So if you think about it, my mom died of breast cancer. She had 1,000 blood draws. She had radiation. She had a mammogram. She had all of these tests that none of it prevented it. It was just used to discover it. Colonoscopies prevent colon cancer, you guys, because these polyps can turn into cancer and you take it out during a colonoscopy. Okay, that's the key. Next slide. You can go through the next slide. All righty, so once again, the screening is different from what these people have. So if you have a family history, once again, or you have a personal history of these, then these are people who need colorectal screening earlier. So if your family has a history of cancer, then you need colon cancer, you need to have screening 10 years before the age that they were diagnosed. That's very important. So if my if I had colon cancer at 42, my daughters would have to be screened at 32, okay? And that is not a hard, fast rule, but that is something that, you need to talk to your doctor about. It's a hard, fast rule if you see somebody like that. Next slide. And so once again, these are the screening guidelines. We usually screen up to age 85, okay? However, there's been a couple times where I've gone over this. I've had 88-year-olds who are like still running half marathons. They're still going to live at least probably another 8 years, 5 to 8 years. And so, if they have a history of polyps, I have still done this particular colonoscopy for them. But there's other tests, you guys, that are really important that we talk about. Next slide. So there's also these tests that are stool-based tests, okay? So you guys have seen all those videos now that they advertise where you basically poop in a cup, mail it in, okay? Now that looks for different changes in DNA that can portend cancer. There's also FIT tests. When I go out and we do a lot of community events, and I think the ACS helped us when I was the head of colorectal cancer at Cedars, we got FIT tests and we would do these outreaches and we would give everybody a FIT test. A FIT test is basically you have a bowel movement at home, you collect some of the stool, and we look for any blood or changes in it. And then if it's positive, so here's the key. If any of those are positive, then you need your colonoscopy, okay? And it's interesting because FIT tests are done every year. The stool DNA test will be done every 3 years. Now, the hard part with this is that you have to kind of be on top of it. It's easier now with electronic medical records and docs because they, we have like red flags or flags can pop up that you need to do this test, but you have to be on this more, okay? And so once again, these tests are good at finding cancer, but they're not as good at finding polyps, okay? And once again, the whole point, if you can get one, the point of a colonoscopy is actually preventing cancer, okay? But these tests, I offer these tests where if patients are sick and that giving them a colonoscopy would be an anesthetic risk, then I do these first. If patients just flat out refuse, I do this. However, most of my patients don't refuse the colonoscopy once I talk about their family situation. Okay, next slide.
1 second, we have a question. If polyps are found and removed, during a screening, what are the chances of them returning?
That's a beautiful question. So it's interesting. If you find one polyp, there's a chance that there was a missed polyp because most polyps come in two, right? 2 to 3. So there's different guidelines. So it's interesting. The national guidelines, which is about in 5 years, you're supposed to have a repeat colonoscopy. The colorectal guidelines are 3 to 5 years. Because if you look at studies that show, even with the colonoscopy, there's about a 6% miss rate, which we think a polyp miss rate, which we think is actually higher. They did the study in Canada where I'm the person, or a doctor's the person who does the scope. I know that after I do your colonoscopy, another doctor is going to come in right after me and do it again. Okay. So even when a doctor knew another doctor was coming in, because you have to think, if I know somebody else is going to do this again, I'm going to be really careful, right? Like, I don't want to be shown up by this other doctor who finds a polyp in somebody I just did a colonoscopy for, and I missed it. So even when a doctor knew that somebody was going to come behind them and do the same procedure, there was still a 6% miss rate, meaning that 6% of the time another polyp was found. So it's probably, in the general population, it's probably 11%. So if you do it every 3 years or 5 years, you cover not only the missed polyp, but then potentially, but also a patient could be a polyp former. And so you would take care of that also. And so that's really the key, is that if you do it for if you have a polyp, you do it every 3 to 5 years until there's no polyp, then you can go to that 10-year mark if you're low risk. Next slide. So once again, a colonoscopy, you guys, is first of all your sleep. Okay, it is not as bad as people think. The hardest part was the day before. It's this prep. Everybody talks about the prep, and it's hard because you have to take a day off work. You got to get somebody to drive you there. So there are challenges. Okay, it's a family affair. I do like family colonoscopies now, where it'll be like 5 or 6 family members who come in and they'll do colonoscopies. I mean, because that's the only way they can get their father to do it. That's the only way they can get their brother to do it. And basically, you go to sleep, and we put a thin scope in the anus, carry it all the way through to the cecum, which is the first part of the colon, and we remove polyps at that time. Okay, so that's how it's prevented. All right. Now, the risk of you having a perforation. So everybody, the people who I know that are most hesitant will always then bring up, well, I knew somebody got a perforation, and I'll say, what's a perforation? They don't know, right? But everybody knows somebody who had a bad experience. Nobody really knows that person, but they just heard it. It is very, very safe. You guys, less than a 1% complication rate for patients having a screening colonoscopy, less than 0.5%. Now, what I always tell patients is, yeah, it's very low, but if it happens to you, right, it's 100%. But it is extremely low during a screening. During a diagnostic, the higher rates, the reason it's even a 1% is that if you do a colonoscopy in somebody who has acute abdominal pain or they have inflammatory bowel disease, then there's an increased risk of perforation. It's important to know that even if there is a complication like a perforation, most people don't need surgery on that, and it heals with antibiotics. Next slide. Okay, we talked about these stool-based tests, and I'm kind of speeding through this part a little bit, you guys, because I spent so much time on the first part, and I want to make sure we have time at the end. But we talked about this. The good thing with these tests are that you don't need anesthesia. Nobody needs to drive you anywhere. They do need to be done more often, every 1 to 3 years. And that's important that you know that, and the physician understands that also. And so that is an option. And the ACS likes to say that the best test is the one that you can get and you're gonna do. Okay, and that is true. But it's still important to know that, and these stool tests do save lives. Okay, the stool tests do save lives because if you find cancer, they find cancer early. And that's what's great about colorectal cancer, that even if you have it, there's a 90% cure rate. If you see somebody like me within stage 1, stage 2, 90% of the time, or 90% for stage 1, about 80% for stage 2. But you're going to be, and that's 5-year survival rate, but you're going to be alive. Okay, and that's why these tests are still great, because even if you have to have surgery, you're going to live. Okay, but ideally, in my opinion, okay, in the ideal world, the colonoscopy is the one that prevents. And if you can do that, if you can get that, that's what I would recommend. Next slide.
I'm going to stop real 1 second for some questions that we have in the chat.
Did I get to enough stuff? We don't talk about the surgery today. We can do that part 2.
Yes, part 2.
All right.
So going back to the FIT test, someone asked it. So even if I have a recent negative FIT test, it would still be recommended to go ahead and get a colonoscopy to check for removed polyps.
So yeah, yes. I mean, it's well, so that's complex in terms of yes. If you've never had a colonoscopy ever, okay, the way I recommend is that if you've never had a colonoscopy, then 100% you should have that. Now, if you had a colonoscopy and it was negative, and you're offered the fit test, then and you had no polyps. When I say negative, like you had no polyps, and I really think the fit test could be almost just as good. Myself, I still have colonoscopies every 5 to 10 years, but it is a fit test or a stool DNA test can be done then, but I don't like it as a first time screening. I think the first time, or even if you get screened with a fit test and it's negative, you still, in my opinion, need to have a documented colonoscopy just to make sure you don't have polyps. Because once again, polyps are what can lead to cancer, and so that's a big deal. Now the thought is these are the fit test and the stool DNA test are about 40% in terms of finding polyps. Okay, and it's true, bigger polyps, 40 to maybe 70% finding polyps. And if you have a positive one, then you need to go ahead and get your colonoscopy. But I still think that the gold standard is colonoscopy, especially for finding polyps. And once you have no polyps, then you can talk about like the fit tests, maybe, and do you need another colonoscopy? Can you wait 10 years? That's my thought process.
Okay, and next question. My father and my husband had colon cancer. I have been getting screened since age 29. They caught my husband's cancer very late, stage 4 at age 51. Should my kids still get screened at age 41? They
No.
believe my husband
Nope. 32, 30, 35, I would start. Sorry, I didn't mean to call you. I just operated. Literally, that story is what I just ran in here from. Because a person, had a father, actually they had it on two sides. They had a father who had it the same age. And so they did the right thing, right? They waited 10 years before they were even told about it, but really it should be earlier than that. And more importantly, Jen, is that the best thing you can do, whoever asked that question, is you need to look at the pathology of your husband, because there's these tests now that are that look for genetic syndrome. So we do testing at Cedars. Every single patient who I operate on for colon cancer, even if they're over the age of 60, they have the funding to do genetic testing on every single tumor. However, if you have it that young, he needs to have that looked at, because if it's positive for something called HNPCC, then your children would actually start getting screened at like 32. Okay, and it's other cancers you need to look at for colon cancer, endometrial cancer, kidney cancer, some brain cancers can all be related to this syndrome. And so a lot of times when young people, actually most of the time when young people get this, until this new uptick in all this obesity related cancer, it was a genetic syndrome. And so that's something that's very important. And the ACS actually has a lot of information on the HNPCC and those genetic variants.
Great, thank you. That's all the questions so far. So I guess we can move on.
All right, I think you told me till 7, right? I think we got 2 minutes. You want me to wrap it up, or you want me to speak through it? It's
Yeah,
up to you.
we can just, if you want to wrap up some stuff, and then we can close it out.
I really want to say, you guys, that more. First of all, in all seriousness, I talk about my mom a lot. The reason I am so dedicated to the ACS is it's one thing to be my mom died, like I said, a month before I graduated med school. I was distraught. Okay. I did not know. I took it personally because when you graduate med school, you think you're a doctor, you're not a real doctor yet. Okay. No matter what anybody says. So I didn't know what to do. And my family didn't know what to do. I'm the first doctor in my family. The ACS towards the end were bringing her wigs. They were providing transportation. They did all of these things. So I trust them, and their website is literally telling you more. And I get all teary-eyed, but I really feel this. I'm really passionate about this. The ACS is all you really need in terms of like they're even, and I don't know if they want me to say this, they're ahead of the government. So like so before the ACS fought, and I was with them fighting for this age 45 for everybody, the government guidelines just changed. Like literally, we knew this 5 years ago. Okay. So this is your number one resource when you need something, but more importantly, when you don't, when you just want to learn. Okay. That's the biggest thing. Number 2, your healthcare advocacy, working with your doctor, being teammates, finding somebody who relates to you, not just because of their race, but because of experiences. They understand you. They understand your body language. You have to have somebody who will listen to you, but you have to have a doctor who you have to have somebody you trust so that you listen to them, him or her. So it's a two-way street. But if you don't have that, not every doctor is for every patient, but you need to find that. Okay. And then lastly, when it comes to to your own health. You know, I tell patients all the time, I cannot love you more than you love yourself. Okay. And loving yourself doesn't mean just finding the right partner to be with. It doesn't mean going just, the superficial ways love yourself. Love yourself means you care about how you are on the inside. In LA, I'm in Beverly Hills, I'm in Los Al. People will spend so much money on how they look on the outside. It's ridiculous. People drive these fancy cars or they rent these cars. They have an apartment, got a Lamborghini. They look beautiful on the outside, but they are death on the inside. You have to take care of your inside and if you don't want to do it for yourself, lastly, you do it for your kids, you do it for your generation, and you do it for your people, okay? You do it for your people. That's the most important thing. I tell my kids all the time, I don't care what everybody else is doing, you got to be able to hold up the Morel name, meaning that I don't care if you're rich, I don't care if you're poor, but you got to have integrity. You got to take care of yourself because it's not just you're impacting all of us. And so that's really what I wanted to say today. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much. You see some of the comments in the chat that we need a part 2. And I agree. This has been a wealth of information. And I'm just excited about what I've learned and kind of what I can share. I know I'm going to change my diet and do some other things as well.
So real quick, can I just say one other thing?
Of course,
which I think is really important for fiber. People always think of Metamucil and Citrusil, okay? Fiber, so blackberries, blueberries, raspberries have 7.2 to 7.5 grams of fiber per cup. We need 25 grams of fiber a day, every single day. My kids do this for me now, but I do it. 2 cups of blackberries, blueberries, raspberries, okay? A cup of almond milk, a cup of some protein powder and ice, and I blend that. I walk out the house with 14 grams of fiber a day, okay? And what's good about fiber is you lose weight because you'll be full, you may miss lunch. So it actually helps with all of that. And if you're a diabetic, because of the glycemic index, you can still eat those fruits. Okay, it won't affect your diabetes. So that's important. So every time I say I'm done, then there's one more thing to say. My bad.
It's all good. We appreciate the love you've given us. I just have to say thank you to you, Dr. Morel. Jen, thank you for you and your team. I know our president, Rick Callender, was on the line as well. Thank him, and also the NAACP staff that put this together. So some of the biggest takeaways, and I hope that we all learn this, that it is curable by, our diet and exercise and things of that nature. So that's very important. The next training that we'll have, everybody, will be in August. We would love to hear from everyone about the topic that we want to discuss. There may be a part 2. We'll have to negotiate with Jen about what she wants to do, but nonetheless, you will receive all the material, the slides, as well as the training material from this particular session once we leave here today. And then also you're going to get a survey. Everyone who participated today, you'll get a survey. We just want to hear from you about what you want to see next, kind of how you want us to engage and operate moving forward. But Dr. Morel, this is not the last time you'll hear from NAACP. I guarantee you that. And just thank you for your time today. Jen, I think we're going to close, but if there's anything you want to say or anyone from your team wants to say anything, please do so. But from our end, NAACP, and we thank you all for what you've done for us this evening. Very informational. And, we definitely need to talk more about colorectal cancer and what we can do to stay healthy. So thank you so much.
Yeah, no, you basically said everything that I was going to say. These are the types of talks that we need within our community. We need it from doctors that understand from our perspective, that can speak exactly to why there may be some disparities. So we want to hear from everyone here. So you definitely will be getting a recording of this. You'll be getting materials and other information. And like Cedric said, the next training and the next presentation is going to be in August, but we want to hear from you. So if enough people say that Dr. Morel needs to come back for a part 2, then that may just need to happen. So, but thank you all for staying on, staying past 7. And thank you, Dr. Morel. Thank you, Cedric. Thank you, everyone that helped to put this together. And with that, I hope everyone has an amazing night. Good night.
Thanks, guys. Good talk, Zuri.
Thank you.